So, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us. Our session today is going to be about 50 minutes. My name is Katrina. I work for Wild Rivers Conservancy as the Environmental Education Coordinator. I'll be in the background moderating the chat, helping with any technical difficulties during the session. And so, before we begin, I'd like to mention a couple of housekeeping things. There's a chat icon on the bottom of the screen. If you click on that, it'll open up the chat. And if you have any technical issues or comments to make this presentation, to make this presentation work better, please put them in the chat. If you have any questions at any point during the presentation, I'm going to encourage you to type those into the chat and we'll get to them at the end or whenever there's a little question break. This session is being recorded and will be made permanently available on the Wild Rivers Conservancy YouTube account. And so with all of that out of the way, I'd like to introduce our speaker and give the rest of the time to them. So please welcome Shawna from the Great Lakes Aquarium.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here this morning. I'm really excited to talk with you all a little bit about the Great Lakes Aquarium where I work, and also about sturgeon, which are, as you probably know, a super cool fish we have in our region, and also a really important fish and conservation project that we are going to be working on here at the aquarium. Just have to figure out how to... Katrina, how do I move forward here? There we go. Okay, I got it. I don't know how I did it, but we got it. All right. So, like I said, I work at Great Lakes Aquarium, which is in Duluth, Minnesota. And if you've ever been to Duluth, you've probably seen us because we are right by the lift bridge. So we're that multicolored building in downtown Duluth, right on the water, right on the harbor. And where we are located is super important for the Sturgeon project. So we will be, I'll get into that in a little bit. So Great Lakes Aquarium has about 100 staff members, and we work on everything from animal care to guest services to the operations and custodians, teachers work here. And then there's also about 200 volunteers. We're open 363 days a year, and we take care of about 2,600 individual animals. So I'm going to give you all a second to think through who those animals are. Who do you think lives here at the aquarium? If you've been here before, maybe you already kind of know the different groups of animals we have, but I'm going to give you all a minute to think on that. And if you want to put some guesses into the chat, you're welcome to. What I'm going to have you consider is, of those animals, how many are fish? How many are invertebrates, amphibians, reptiles, birds, or mammals? I'll give you just a minute to think on that. You might be assuming that since we're an aquarium, we're like all fish, right? And that would be fair. About half of our animals here are fish. And our most well-known or popular fish probably are sturgeon, although we also have sharks, who some people might put in that in the same category as our sturgeon. And they're very popular. We have a shark touch pool that just opened up last year. And if you've been here in the last year, you've maybe gotten to know them a little bit, along with the sturgeon and our sturgeon touch pool. And then we have also a lot of ocean fish who live in our saltwater tanks. But we also have more than 1,000 invertebrates. So those are our cockroaches, millipedes, walking sticks, our jellies, if you've seen our jellyfish touch pool. And then our octopus is probably our best, most well-known invertebrate this year. We also have about 18 amphibians and about 15 reptiles and about 13 birds, including ducks, our turkey vulture, our crow, and we recently got chickens who will be working with our education programs. And then we have about seven mammals, and skunks are probably favorite among among our mammals. I'll tell you a little bit more about the behind the scenes stuff we do here. We have 136,000 gallons of water on the exhibit floor. And then we also have a lot more down in the basement in our quarantine where some more animals live, and in our holding tanks and pipes. So, water is, of course, a really big part of our daily work, and it takes a lot to manage it. It takes a lot to keep it clean. And every habitat on the exhibit floor has its own temperature and its own water chemistry. So we take care of everything from a 45-degree freshwater tank for our lampreys to an 82-degree saltwater tank for our coral reef habitat. Uh, so, for example, what that water means is that our water bill is more than $60,000 a year. Our electric bill is about $300,000 a year. So there's a lot that we do and manage to keep the aquarium running and all of the animals thriving. And that's why it takes those 300 people that I mentioned to do what we do. What exactly is it that we're doing every day? Of course, we're caring for all of those animals, and many of those animals are rescued animals who could not be released back in the wild and thrive in the wild. And so we help them advocate for their species and for their environment. And we do a lot of environmental education. So whether you come here for one day as a visitor, or you come here for a week-long camp, or come as a field trip, we are always doing education about the animals who live here and the ecosystem that we live in and the overall planet. And we also help with conservation efforts. And our new sturgeon project that we'll talk about today is one of those really important efforts that we're doing. So we're going to be starting this summer a really exciting conservation project. And that is that we are going to help restore sturgeon populations in Lake Superior. And we're going to be working with a lot of partners. So the most important partner we work with are our Ojibwe neighbors and so are the sovereign tribal nations of Fond du Lac, especially since they live right on the St. Louis River with us. We also work with the DNR, the Department of Natural Resources, and we work with the Fish and Wildlife Service. And several other partners, other organizations around Minnesota and Wisconsin, who are all really invested in making sure that our sturgeon populations are good. So where you all live around the St. Croix and the Namakagon, Lake Sturgeon populations are doing really well right now. And that's not the case for Lake Superior or for the St. Louis River. And so we'll get into that a little bit more in a bit. But first, let's talk about what a sturgeon actually is. So here's some questions I want you all to think about, and I'll give you a minute to do that. First, how old is a sturgeon species? How long have sturgeons been around on the planet? And how about individually? How long do they live? Think about how big a sturgeon can get. Maybe you already know that. Maybe you've heard that from some of the other speakers this week. How do they eat? And how do they reproduce? And some of these questions give clues to why our conservation project matters right now. So I'll get into this first question. How old is the species? They're ancient. There are about 27 species of sturgeon all over the world, and they come from the same species that dates back all the way to the early Jurassic period. So these fish, as a species, are like 200 million years old. They've seen everything that this planet has been through since the dinosaurs. Uh, and individually, they can also get, of course, not that old, but pretty old for a fish, especially females. Females can live up to 150 years old. Males will potentially live up to about 100 years old. So they're around for a really long time. And they also get really, really big in that time. So lake sturgeon aren't the biggest sturgeon species around the world. Beluga sturgeon, who live in Russia, and we do have one at Great Lakes Aquarium, they can be about 20 feet long. Lake sturgeon around us can get up to maybe about 7 feet long. The Ojibwe word, um, Nabakagon Sebi, means river at the place abundant with sturgeon. So you all live in an area that actually is named after sturgeon and how cool they are and how important they are for us. So a few more answers to these questions. How do they eat? So sturgeon don't have teeth. So they catch prey a little bit differently than most other fish we're accustomed to around here. They actually will suck food into their mouth, and their mouth is on the bottom. So here I have a sturgeon head to look at. Their mouth is actually underneath and behind these little barbell feelers of theirs. So instead of their mouth opening kind of in the front of their face, it's on the bottom. And they therefore don't rely on their eyes to catch prey. So instead, they use those barbels to sense, and they can sense things almost like electrically, and with a really strong sense of smell also. And so their barbels are super important sensory organs for them, and they'll eat shellfish like clams and mussels. They'll eat crustaceans, different kinds of fish, macro and microinvertebrates. They eat crabs and barnacles, and they'll also eat insect larvae. And I see a question, the oldest recorded sturgeon ever found. I'm not positive on that specifically, but I know it's at least 150 years. So you all can probably, if somebody wants to Google that and pop the answer into the chat, I'd be curious, and we can give Rose an exact answer. So sturgeon eat mostly as bottom feeders. So they're moving around the bottom of the lakes and rivers and finding their food mostly on the bottom. It's certainly underneath them. And one thing that's interesting about the fish who live here at the aquarium is we actually have to hand feed them when they're in some of the tanks that they live in with other fish. So if we just feed fish from the top, which is what we normally do, everybody else is going to eat all the food before it gets down to the bottom where the sturgeons are. So we feed them by hand, and we target feed them to make sure that they're getting all the food that they need. Now, when they mate, sturgeon will reproduce by spawning way up in the really shallow parts. Oh, thank you. 154 years old. Awesome. So they'll go up to the really shallow parts of rivers once they reach reproductive age, which is actually not until they're in their 20s. So it takes them a really long time to grow big enough and mature to the point that they will reproduce. Females especially don't reproduce every year, even once they are in their 20s. We've learned that our lake sturgeon tend to go back up into the spawning areas like every 3 or 4 or even 5 years. And so we're not exactly sure why that is, but that's partly why it's so hard for us to get to a point that their population is at a better point. And we'll talk more about that. So they reproduce by going kind of like salmon do, back up into the river after swimming around the lake for years and years, and leaving eggs in Like the really rocky areas where eggs won't tend to like get caught by the current. So sturgeon really like to leap out of the water, which is something that you may have seen, especially in the rivers where you all live. So when they do that, they make a giant splash that's transferred for about half a mile in the water. And think about why that might be. So sturgeon leap maybe for a few reasons. We know for sure that fish, they're not the only fish who do this, right? So we know that other kinds of fish will leap out of the water as a way of shaking off parasites off of their skin. With sturgeon, maybe they're trying to shake off, especially lamprey. They're particularly like painful and frustrating and even dangerous for the host uh, parasite that we have in Lake Superior. We wonder too if it's for communication to other sturgeon, maybe about food that they've found, maybe to see something out of the water. So we know that whales, for example, will do something called spy hopping, where they come up out of the water to see what's going on. So it's possible that sturgeon are doing that. It might be for fun, because if you could swim in the water and jump out of it, like why wouldn't you, right? That sounds like a fun thing to do if you're a fish. So there's a lot of reasons, and a lot of other fish who do it. Um, Rays, sharks, whales, smaller fish who live in tide pools, who actually can remember where tide pools are located. So they have like a map in their mind and they can jump from one to another in low tide. So this is a behavior that is pretty common among fish, and suggests actually like some pretty high levels of intelligence for them. Other cool things that sturgeon do is they can kind of like walk on their tails along the bottom of a lake or river. And the sturgeon in Great Lakes Aquarium, they've taught us a lot of really interesting thing about their personalities. So we know that they're kind of like pets. They make relationships with individual people. We can see that with our sturgeon who live in the large tank where they have to be hand fed, that they recognize different divers who come in, and they have different relationships and behaviors that they'll give to divers they know really well. They get pet. They like to get hugged even. They seem to tease people in the water. And the sturgeon in our touch pool, they'll come up to the surface to get pet. And we know that it's not for food because visitors aren't the ones feeding them. So it's beyond a simple awareness that people bring them food that they want. And there seems to also be like a desire to connect. So it shouldn't surprise us, right? Dogs and cats do that. Lots of animals do that with humans, and we're animals too. So, like I said, the Ojibwe word for the Namakagon comes from our understanding that sturgeon are abundant there and that they're really important there. And the Ojibwe name for sturgeon is Name. Now let's talk about where we are at today and where we came from with sturgeon. Like I said, Ojibwe and other indigenous nations throughout time in this area have had a long relationship with sturgeon. Uh, we know that before fur traders and colonizers came to this area, that indigenous nations, along with sturgeon, were really abundant here, and they knew all about sturgeon. They knew their behaviors. They knew their important role in the waterways. And indigenous people had deep respect for sturgeon. There's even a tribe named after sturgeon. They were named that because they were known as being the peacekeepers and the diplomatic tribe who would solve problems among people. And so they were named sturgeon because sturgeon have a really peaceful personality. Indigenous people had ceremonies about them. Sturgeon were part of their spiritual lives. They relied on sturgeon for food, for making tools, and even making toys out of different body parts. And they were careful to make sure that they never hunted too many so that the population would stay abundant. And this, by the way, is a book that you can find about sturgeon. I highly recommend it. It's got really cool information and also really cool illustrations in it. So in the early 1900s, sturgeon were thriving in all of the waterways around here, including Lake Superior. And then in the mid 1900s, sturgeon began to decline with industrialization, especially in the estuary in the St. Louis Bay here in Duluth. And people realized that they taste good. They use them for something called isinglass, which is used in producing wine and beer. We really degraded their habitat from logging and from industry, like I said. And sometimes people were just throwing sturgeon up onto the banks because they were big and they were taking up space where logs were going, and they would use them for firewood and they would use them for caviar. So after many years of overfishing, overuse, just a total disrespect for them, we saw sturgeon numbers on a major decline. And like we already know, their reproductive strategy of not even being mature enough to reproduce until they're in their 20s, uh, that makes for a really difficult recovery. But we have been working on recovery of the river itself for a long time. In 1972, the Clean Water Act passed, and that was super important for our area. We started cleaning up the river, industry changed, laws changed around how we get rid of industrial waste. We stopped mass deforestation and logging in the way that we were doing that was polluting the rivers. And what we saw once the worst of industrialization was cleaned up is that many animals came back. So walleye and beaver and foxes and mallards and loons who before 1972 were all on the brink of either extinction or certainly disappearance from this area, those bounced back, but sturgeon have not. Partly because of the way they reproduce, but also because of those electrosensors they have to find food, is also how they find their way back to spawn. So if a river has changed drastically in 20 years and the water chemistry has changed to the point that sturgeon might not be able to recognize it or don't feel safe or healthy in it, they're not going to return. We also know that dams made it difficult for them to return to their spawning because remember, they need to go way far up in the really shallow parts so that the eggs don't float away in the current. So at that point in 1972, while other animals were coming back, sturgeon populations had probably become too decimated to recover on their own. In 1983, we started stocking rivers. And we stocked over, I wasn't there, but people stocked more than 145,000 sturgeon between 1983 and the year 2000. And so we were seeing better and better adult sturgeon numbers, but we still weren't seeing them return to the spawning waters. And that's even after a lot of work we did, especially in the St. Louis River, for the habitat to be restored. And so now we can swim in it again. We can fish for healthier fish in it. But we're still not seeing sturgeon spawn. And so there's another missing piece. And that is where the Great Lakes Aquarium comes in. So currently, they've been rearing fish to be released into the St. Louis River in southern Wisconsin. So it's not, they're not being raised in the water we want them to return to. So we think that since sturgeon probably imprint on that water chemistry, that if we raise them in the water we want them to return to, they'll have better luck at reproducing 20 years from now. So that's why now we're going to be doing this project at the aquarium because we can use the water we want them to return to since that's where we live. We're right on the bay. And so this year we've started this project. The trailer moved here. And so if you come to Duluth, you can see the trailer parked between the aquarium and the lake walk. And in that trailer, there's going to be about 3,000 teeny tiny little baby sturgeon who will grow from just tiny little eggs when they first arrive here in the next few weeks to about 7 inches long when we release them in October. And meanwhile, people will get to see what's going on inside the trailer. They'll get to hear all about how they're doing, and then they'll all get tagged. So you'll even be able to follow fish on their journey for the next many years. So in March, we got that trailer. We'll start rearing our first set of fish this year, this summer. We'll release them in the fall. And then in next year, when we take more fish in to do this again or more eggs in, we will actually also open an exhibit about it so that people who come to the aquarium get to see some of the fish. Those who in October are the smallest will stay back for another whole year and they'll be on exhibit. And then they'll get released and have an even better chance of surviving because when they get released, then they'll be about 10 inches long. So if you have been to the aquarium, you've seen our sturgeon touch tank, and that will stay there. Those sturgeon will not be released. But what you will see that is new after next year is that we'll have a whole new built out exhibit besides the trailer where everyone will get to meet some of these baby sturgeon and they'll get to walk through the whole history of sturgeon in our region. And it will be explained to us all through the perspective of Ojibwe people who know them best. So it's a really important project, not just for sturgeon, but also for restoring the really deep knowledge and wisdom that Ojibwe nations have had about sturgeon and about our region since long before white people arrived here. So the sturgeon story highlights decades of conservation efforts that have already been made to make a big difference in bringing sturgeon back from the brink of extinction in Lake Superior. But it's also a really cool collaboration that not just the aquarium and Ojibwe people are doing, but the DNR and lots of other people who are involved also. So I can take questions now, and I see there's one. What made me interested in studying sturgeon? I think for me, so I came to the aquarium not knowing all that much about sturgeon other than growing up in the area. I got to be in rivers where I would see them leap out of the water. And I always thought that was so cool because we don't see that a lot here. There are some other fish who do it, but sturgeon are known for it. They do it a lot. And because they're so big and cool looking, it's really awesome to see that happen. So that's what first sparked my interest in sturgeon. And then when I started working at the aquarium, I learned more and more about some of the really cool facts that make sturgeon unique. For example, we can count how many years they have been alive in the same way we can count how long a tree has been alive. So trees have rings inside and grow out in that way. And sturgeon have bones that do the same thing. So we can see on a slice of their bone how many rings are on it, and that's how many years they've been alive. So that's a really interesting way too that we can mark, just like with trees, like how much a sturgeon grew in a given year. And we can see kind of across different sturgeon was that year difficult for them for a certain reason. So we can tie that to other research around climate change and water temperature and anything that may have happened in the water that might have been traumatic for fish, like a certain chemical being found in the water and that sort of thing. So sturgeon give us a lot of opportunities to do important research that's not just important for sturgeon, but for the rest of our ecosystem. That's really interesting. Besides sturgeon, my favorite animal at the aquarium? That's a really good question. And I'd be curious if you all have any, if you want to put those in the chat, um, if you've been to the aquarium yet. I think for me, um, the otters for sure. The otters are really cool. So if you haven't been to the aquarium, we have two river otters who were rescued because they had taken up residence on farmland, and the farmer wanted to trap and kill them because they were seen as a pest and predator. Um, and otters are really interesting because while they are super adorable, like they are so cute, they're also really uh, pretty aggressive, and they have to be because they have to fight for food and for territory um, against animals that are often bigger than them. And so otters have a pretty feisty personality, and the two who live here also have a feisty personality. They were not born in human care. They came to us as rescued and non-releasable animals. And so we keep them as wild as we can. So we're not trying to, teach them to enjoy getting pet. And we're not trying to make them more docile so that guests can meet them. Like we want them to be as wild as they can be because that's how they're happiest. That's how they were born. So the otters are really a cool animal to get to see. We do train them so that we can care for them better. So they get target trained. And if you come to the aquarium at 3 o'clock every day, there's an otter program where we talk through like how we train them and why, so that we can do really important vet care, so that we can make sure that they're both getting the right amount of food and that sort of thing. So the otters are really fun to watch and get to know. The giant isopods are also super cool. So they're new for us. They just came last year and in our Lava to Lakes exhibit. And if you've never seen a giant isopod, imagine what aliens look like in most alien movies, and that's kind of what the isopod looks like from their tummy. So if you look at them, if you were to hold one up and see like underneath their shell, they really do look like uh, like what aliens look like in movies, what have inspired our imagination for aliens. And they're really ancient species, and they're really cool to watch. And they're hard to see because they hide a lot and they snooze a lot. But they're in a deep water aquarium that's pretty dark, and you can look for them in the sand, and they're incredible to experience. My favorite animal might be the skunks are among them. So every day we walk the skunks. And so you may have seen that if you've been here, the skunks out in the backyard for a walk. And it's really good enrichment for them because they're natural diggers, right? And just yesterday I was on a skunk walk, and he found a hibernating toad deep in the ground, and I didn't know what he was digging up, and all of a sudden this very sleepy toad emerged. And so I put him back in and recovered him. I don't think he was ready to be awake yet. But that's in the wild, that's the sort of thing they'll eat. They'll dig up grubs, they'll dig up roots. They really like eating plants and vegetables and fruit, but they also really like eating little insects. And they'll even eat uh, birds and all sorts of things. Skunks are sort of scavengers, and they're really important in our ecosystem because they'll eat things that are already dead, and so they help clean up the ecosystem. And they're very docile, and the only time they'll spray is if they really, really feel threatened for their lives or for their babies' lives. So if you ever see a skunk definitely like give them space and give them some compassion and love because they're doing important work for our ecosystem and they're a misunderstood species. So I think skunks might be my favorite because they're so cool. They have cool personalities, and also because they're important and they're misunderstood. Any other questions from the group?
I have one for you.
Yeah.
What would you say to any students who are watching right now who wanted to get into research and, science like you are?
Hmm, that's a great question. You can start now. When I was in high school, I did internships at places like the aquarium. We have jobs for people once you turn 15 that you can be in the building and learning about the work we do and talking to guests about the work we do. And you can work your way into like a research or an animal care position. I think if you have something that you're interested in now, you don't need to wait for an assignment or for an internship or a job. You can just learn. And that's a really great way for you to decide what you care about the most, what you value, what you want to learn more about. And then you have some of the tools already because you already know things. So then moving into as you get older and you can take on internships or find summer jobs, you come with a lot of skills because you have information that you can grow with. So if you're interested in science research, join like a summer program where you get to do hands-on stuff. The aquarium has something like that. We have something called Junior Waves. So if you live close enough that you could handle getting driven in once a week, the Waves program might be a really cool thing for you. It's open to anyone in sixth grade and above or going into sixth grade through senior year. And we do hands-on research. We do helping the animal care staff. We go on field trips where we do like water quality research. We go on boats and ships. We go on sailboats. We go rafting. We do all sorts of cool things. So if that is interesting to you and you might be able to get to Duluth once a week, definitely check our website and look into that. But there are other programs too, probably closer to you that might be similar.
Am I too old for the Waves program or?
You could come hang out too.
Okay, okay, good.
Yeah,
Well,
lots of us adults do.
well, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. I know I was geeking out about it in the background here. I'm very excited to go up and see all the tiny baby sturgeons.
Awesome. Yes, join us anytime this summer. You'll get to see into the trailer via a video screen. So if you find yourself in Duluth, definitely come hear more about the sturgeon, meet the otters, meet the skunks. We will be here all year round.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for sharing your time and your expertise. I know I really appreciate it. And for all of you who are joining us, I hope you join us again tomorrow for another day of Youth Summit where we'll learn a few more things. And thank you so much, once again, Shawna and our classroom for joining us.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.